Hello and welcome to this pedestrian space hosted roundtable. I'm very excited because it is now December. Hello, December. We are joined here today for what is the first of pedestrian spaces Sustainable Urbanism Global Perspective series. We are beginning this series today with our featured guest, Dr. Minal Pathak, who is Associate Professor of the Global Center for Environment and Energy at Ahmedabad University. I hope I got that pronunciation correct. And she is also a senior scientist with the Technical Support Unit of Working Group 3 of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. You might be familiar with some of their reports. I first learned about Dr. Pathak's work via an article at questionofcities.org. The article is called "This May Be the Coolest Summer, Be Ready for 51 Degrees Celsius." I recommend looking it up to learn more about her work, and I'm looking forward to a presentation that she has for us today, followed by a Q&A. And I do want to note a few things. Earlier this year, Dr. Pathak and I spoke, and some things that came up in our conversation that could be explored as well in the Q&A, and that she might have also points on in the presentation are communicating about the findings of the IPCC reports for the general public. This decade, so-called decade to act and overshoot, clarifying what that is. That was very insightful to learn more when I spoke with her about what is overshoot. Minal's experience with walkability or lack of in her city, in her community, exploring what can be done at the policy level as well as the personal level, as many of us advocates are interested in, the relationship of mobility status and identity, mobility status and culture, I'm sorry, and also developing encouraging messages for action. So I will turn it over to Dr. Pathak now, and I look forward to perhaps having some of those themes explored in the Q&A as well. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Anika, for this kind introduction, and thanks to all who attended on a Friday afternoon. At least it's afternoon for me. And I'm based in Ahmedabad, which is a city in Western India. And thank you so much, Anika. When we spoke, I tried to convince Anika that I was really probably not the best person for this talk. And let me put out two disclaimers. The first being that my research does not focus on walkability, although I do work on transport solutions that address climate change, including heat and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And walking and cycling, of course, is a very core part of it. And the second one is that I still drive to work on most days. And I will touch upon that in the second half of my presentation. So in today's talk, I will use slides for about 20 to 25 minutes. And in my talk, I'm going to divide half of my talk into findings from the IPCC report as requested by Anika. And then I will go into the issues of my city or Indian cities in general, and which is probably a very different context from what you're probably used to. So Mario and Anika and some others who probably have different issues of walkability, and it would be nice to sort of understand from you what lessons we could draw for Indian cities, or what challenges for you to learn what challenges we face in our context. So I'm going to share my slides now. And can you confirm, Anika, that you can see them?
Yes, I see them.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to speak about the sixth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is where I work. And I'm also a professor at Ahmedabad University. So part of this is from the IPCC and part of this is my research and observations. So for those of you, many of you must be familiar with the IPCC, but this is a UN body, and we are comprised of 195 member governments. So what you see on this slide is a typical IPCC plenary, and our summary reports are approved line by line by governments. So it's quite challenging and quite rigorous, the process of the IPCC. Within the IPCC, we have three working groups. So the first working group focuses on the science of climate change, so heat, sea level rise, climate models, regional temperature change. The second working group focuses on impacts to ecosystems and people. And working group 3 focuses on mitigation, which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So my work focuses on related to working group 3. Just a quick look at the numbers. Hundreds of authors volunteer their time to write the IPCC reports. They are nominated by their country governments to be authors on the IPCC and vetted through a selection process that focuses on expertise, but also on regional and gender balance. So in the Working Group 3 report, we had over 250 authors from 65 countries, and we received 18,000 review comments, and each of these review comments have to be responded to individually by the authors. So I'll delve into the findings, and just to say that last decade had the highest average emissions ever in human history. And you can see, and some people argue, and sometimes we hear these arguments a lot less now, but that the Earth's climate had always been warming and cooling. That is true, but the level that we are seeing right now of CO2 has been unprecedented in over 800,000 years. So you can see the right end of this graph, where you see the levels beyond in the period from industrialization and where they are now. So the report clearly tells us that unless there are immediate and deep, and I focus on the words immediate and deep, it's not small scale, it is large scale, and there is an urgency to action. And I also focus on across all sectors, we will not be able to limit global warming to 1.5. And we are already seeing the repercussions of global warming in terms of extreme weather events, storms, heat waves in parts of the world where this has never happened before. And if we exceed 1.5, which is what we call overshoot, we could return back, but the impacts on ecosystems will be felt, could almost be irreversible for some systems, and for some others, these could be felt for thousands of years. I would also like to tell the audience that the impacts, some of these gases remain in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. So a CO2 has a lifetime of 100 years. And so the impacts we are seeing now are from emissions that were emitted in the past. And so if we stopped emitting now, we would still see some climate change happening. So very quickly, I will go through this graph. So the orange ribbon at the top is where we are headed. So you can see where we are in 2020, if you can see my cursor, right? If we continue on this path, so the policies that are announced and will be implemented, we are likely to get to 60 gigatons of CO2. But if we want to limit to 1.5, we need to follow the pathway that you see in light blue. And so you can see the difference in emissions, or what we call the emissions gap between where we are and where we need to go. And you can see that this bending is happening almost around 2025. And the report clearly shows that if we want to limit warming to 1.5, the emissions have to peak before 2025, which is now. And they have to be reduced by almost half very soon. We also have to reduce methane emissions, and that's a very ambitious ask. So for 1.5, we will need to achieve net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. And if we want to limit temperature increase to 2 degrees, then we have to limit emissions to zero by 2070. And net zero emissions means all the emissions that come from industries or from transport or from other uses have to be balanced by removals. So you have to reduce emissions, not only reduce substantially, but the remaining emissions also have to be offset either by planting large-scale forest or through other land-based activities or through industrial carbon capture. So the good news is that the report shows there are actions across all these sectors that can enable these emission reductions. And I will not focus on all of these, but I will focus on the last three, which is urban buildings and transport, but also demand and services. But transport is really our focus today. So within cities, of course, cities are where the action is. Large part of the population lives in urban areas, although the context where I am in, we are only 35% urban, and we are expecting to continue to urbanize for the next 3 or 4 decades. And there will be a significant influx of people from rural areas into cities. Within cities, the 4 key solutions to reducing greenhouse gas emissions range from urban planning, so spatial planning, where jobs and housing are co-located. So people have to travel shorter distances, which makes walking and cycling a preferred mode of transport or easier to choose. Electric vehicles is our key option for transport, again, powered by renewable energy. Urban green and blue spaces which can store carbon, they reduce energy consumption and they provide a cooling effect on cities. And finally, consumption production within cities. So our supply chain, where our food comes from, where all the goods that are consumed in cities come from. So we don't only have to reduce emissions within cities, but we also need to look at emissions arising from outside the city. Not all cities are the same place. Like Lisbon is very different from Ahmedabad. So, and Iran, of course, Iranian cities also have their own context, right? So the report says that strategies have to differ based on the type of city it is. So for established city, we need to repurpose and retrofit existing infrastructure, including the buildings stock, but also find ways to support walking and cycling, and also how to get people to choose public transport. The rapidly growing cities have to design their spaces or change land use in such a way that jobs and housing can be co-located, so towards more compact urban form, and of course supported by electrification of transport. And finally, the new cities, which are just still to be built, they really have the biggest opportunity, right? To avoid the lock-ins, to try and see how we can get our infrastructures and services through a more people-centered urban design versus an automobile-centered urban design. Again, in buildings, there are ways to reach net zero buildings, but we have the challenge of the new buildings that are constructed. So to achieve more ambitious building targets for the new buildings, but also how do we pay for retrofitting the old buildings in terms of energy efficiency? Because it's really the cost that households are concerned about, right? So the report calls out for the need to have ambitious policy packages and that are enabled and supported by other packages, including financial support for households. This is the most interesting chapter I have heard in our report, and it often receives, and this is also related to today's talk, that for the first time, the IPCC has its own chapter on demand and services and talks about behavior and lifestyle change. And that we look at, the report assesses 60 actions that people can take. And of those, the top action that came out, you can see in the second bullet, was walking and cycling. That is the action that has the highest potential to reduce emissions, but also deliver other well-being goals. And the overall potential of all these lifestyle choices could range from 40 to 70%. But as we all know, that this requires changes across society, so it's not easy. And some parts of the world or some people require more energy and resources, so they are sort of underprovided. They are consuming much less than the global average, and they will need more room to grow, more room to emit. But again, you see the photo at the bottom is also dietary change that came out as one of the top actions also to on the demand side in terms of reducing emissions. Finally, I come to transport. We cannot do it by technology alone. So we are innovating in technologies for transport more. The efficiency has grown significantly over time. We have innovations in electric vehicles and batteries, but you can see the first bullet, and this is directly from my report, which says that reducing demand is going to be the key. So it's not only how technology can support emission reduction, but it's also how mobility is provided for. So also in many regions, the air quality benefits are so substantial. The photo on the left is from Delhi, where you can see the fog, And you can almost see it today, right now. If someone were in Delhi to take a photo, it would look like this, that the air pollution levels reach such high levels. But the argument that it's expensive is incorrect, because the report shows that the benefits of human health outweigh the cost of providing infrastructure, of managing these transitions. It is critical to take action on climate change if we were to achieve sustainable development goals in the short run for all people, for all groups, and for all regions. I focus on the urban green and blue infrastructure, and that was also the focus of the article that Anika was mentioning, that the report shows that green spaces within cities, parks, forests, ponds, urban roofs, urban agriculture, many of these solutions provide both adaptation benefits, which is they reduce heat stress, they help against floods, they improve air quality, promote biodiversity, but they also reduce emissions. There's something in chat. Let me just please check. Oh, sorry, that was Anika. Yeah, okay, I'll continue. Sorry. Oops, my slide's not moving. Right. So I'm going to make like a transition now to India and to Indian cities and the challenges that we spoke about when we were at the beginning of this talk about where we are. So this is again a very different context. This is my city, and it's a public space. It's a place outside a park. And Indian cities, of course, have huge populations. If you saw the latest UN report, we will be the most populated country in the world next year. Our cities also have very high densities, but also a large number of people walk and cycle in India. And many of these are captive users. They walk and cycle because they cannot afford motorized transport. They just don't have the money to buy a vehicle or to pay for the fuel, and that's why they walk. So the worry is that when incomes in India grow, which they are growing, there will be more motorization, more congestion, more emissions, and poorer quality of life in cities. So this is a photo again from Ahmedabad. So you see the photo on the left. We mostly had two-wheelers, but now we have more cars, leading to more congestion. So the road space has been taken up. So we often see a lot of congestion on the road during peak traffic hours, which makes it very difficult to walk or to cycle. And you can see the cars parked haphazardly. So that takes up the space for walking as well. And you can see, as I was mentioning, and Anika talked about status consumption, that now we have just the cars are getting bigger and bigger. And you can see, of course, that income, the effect of income and the encroachment on the road space. And I find it really, really worrying that this is going to further discourage walking and cycling. This is the mode share data for Ahmedabad. So the graph on the left shows how many people walk. So the blue bar actually at the top shows 37% people walk in Ahmedabad, and the yellow is cycling. So you can see if you combine walking and cycling, it's almost 45 or 40, close to half of the people still walk or cycle. But like I said, that's not the affluent. That's really the poor people or lower middle income category, who walk because it's too expensive to of course buy a car, but also too expensive to own a scooter, a two-wheeler. And you can see here that the cars is very small share of transport now, but it's going to increase substantially. So even with that small share, our roads are choked with traffic and congestion. And on the right, you see the metro and the bus network. So we have a decent amount of public transport, but not enough. For example, why do I drive to work? Because I don't have a direct bus. So if I take my car, and I went from a bigger car, a sedan, to a smaller car now, and I'm going to buy an electric car, but it's still not good enough, I know, right? And I feel, I don't feel good about that choice. But if I don't have a direct bus, so if I have to get to work, it will take me 55 minutes and 2 bus changes to get to my workplace. With a little bit of uncertainty. But if I take my car, it takes me 7 to 10 minutes. And so really the trade-off is huge. This is today's air pollution index. You can see on the right that the orange shows unhealthy for sensitive groups and the red shows unhealthy levels of air quality. And that's again represented in a map on the left. I don't think I need to explain this, but all our stations are exceeding decent health standards for air pollution. The heat article also talked about how urban heat is increasing. So for those of you who are not very familiar with India, our summer temperature in Ahmedabad used to historically touch 44 degrees Celsius. And now because of climate change, it often gets to 46 degrees. On the left, you see a photo of construction workers lying down in the summer. And with extreme heat waves, we could just touch. So I had colleagues at a tea break in my university discussing, oh, it's so hot this summer. And I told them this might be just the coolest summer because it's just going to get worse. And really the urban heat is going to come in the way of pedestrianization. So it's not realistic to expect that people will be able to walk long distances or to work given the heat. And so how are we going to reconcile the changing climate with, and I would like to hear, of course, other experiences as well. I have a few more slides, 3 or 4 more, and then maybe we can talk about your experience as well. So this is an interesting initiative. Our then municipal commissioner announced a walkable street. It was for pedestrians only. It was called Happy Street, and it was a great initiative. And they laid out new infrastructure. They pushed the hawkers out and made it this really nice, attractive space. But you can see in the background that there are motorbikes there. And so on the left, you see that when it was opened, there was a bicycle lane, there was a walking lane, and we had people to be able to buy foods, which you can see the carts on the right. But then the photo on the right, you see people started using this for getting their two-wheelers on the street, and right now it's congested with vehicles and it's lost the purpose for which it was originally established. This is a typical road in Ahmedabad. You can see that cyclists and pedestrians, they share space with motorized vehicles, which makes walking very risky. So there are issues of safety given all the road accidents. And now, as I said, the status consumption. So you can often see vehicles zipping past at very high speeds. And I worry about cycling to work. So sometimes I consider, once I actually did try that, but I was concerned about safety, and I worry about all these people who are walking. You can see these women walking in the middle of the road. So there is really no provision for disabled or more vulnerable people. For the elderly, nobody stops to allow them. So it's like really a very, very different type of problem. And this is again a photo of, I see this all the time, encroachments on the footpaths. You can see the width of the footpath. This is really not amenable to walking, right? There's really no space. And the available space has been encroached either by parked vehicles, by hawkers, or broken footpaths. So I could go on, but the line at the top is from the IPCC report, which says that demand side actions can have the potential to reduce emissions, but only if they are supported by technology and infrastructure. So you cannot expect people to change their, and I think our colleague from Iran was mentioning this earlier, that you're interested in how people change. And I think one of the key solutions is to make this infrastructure available. So if there were a bus, I would use the bus. But you cannot expect people to make sustainable choices if sustainable choices are not available, affordable, or readily provided for. There are really great options. For example, this is a repurposed public infrastructure. So during the daytime, it's a market. During the nighttime, it becomes this very vibrant food space. So I think we have to, this series is called Sustainable Urbanism. And I think for some of these contexts, we have to think of really innovative solutions. How we always have a land constraint. We don't have enough land to keep building roads. So how are we going to use our spaces? How are we going to infill the open lands? How do we make our cities so vibrant that people feel like walking? And in this particular street, people walk because it's just so hard to bring a car, right? And we just need like more of these spaces. We have the My Bike initiative. It's called the My Bike. It's a bike share program, and people cycle, people walk, but only for leisure. So the affluent take these cycles around for a morning cycling round, but they don't really cycle to work. And that's a challenge. So which means they're fit enough to cycle. They would like to cycle, but they don't. And that tells us that maybe if the roads were not congested, if there was a dedicated lane, maybe we could convince some of these guys, myself included, to abandon the car and pick up the cycle. And we are in the lock-in. I won't go explain this whole figure, but once you lay down a road for a car, you're locking in your urban development, right? You're locking in people's behavior for decades to come. You're telling them that, okay, drive on this road because this road is made for you. And then to rethink urbanism is challenging, it's expensive, and it doesn't make any sense. And this is such a simple argument to understand, and yet we are going more and more deeper and deeper and more entrenched into these lock-ins, and including my city, but the smaller cities in India or in China or in Africa where growth is happening. And all these cities are, I'm afraid, being trapped into an automobile-centric culture where it's going to be harder for people to change behaviors. So really, we are missing an opportunity here. And for some of you who are from maybe from Western Europe or other developed country contexts, your cities are locked in. So there are fewer options, I would say, in terms of urban design. But in cases like ours, that we are still building outgrowth areas. We're still constructing new buildings where people will go and live. So if we rethink as a whole new urban development paradigm, we could probably save ourselves a lot of emissions and provide better quality of life. So, well, I don't have to read out this slide, but really that we really need urgent action for addressing climate change, reducing emissions. And this is a slide from our 1.5 report, which says every bit of warming matters, every year matters, and every choice matters. So it's not like sometimes people argue that what does my own choice matter, but it really matters. And now we have numbers to show how much it matters. So I'll stop here, and I hope there were some takeaways, but happy to hear from others.
Thank you so much. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Dr. Pathak. And I think, yes, we commence with Q&A now. I'm sure there are some very interesting questions here. That was really fascinating. I was taking many notes. I'll probably follow up by email with some more questions, but thank you for very, very insightful presentation. Please feel free, participants, to drop questions. I see we have one question. Gela, would you like to ask your question? Well, while we wait, Mario. Yes, Mario has his hand up. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much, and congratulations for your presentation, and congratulations for your Nobel Prize. I think it's the first time I'm talking to a Nobel Prize winner, so
it's not
exciting.
really me; it's thousands of people. Really, I can.
I know, but it's it's a little bit you. Yes, very good, and thank you for all the work you've been doing in IPCC for that. Yeah, and it's quite a coincidence because I was here looking in my emails, and I found it quite quickly, so I didn't distract myself very much. But in 2015, let me see. Yes, in 2015, so that was like 7 years ago. There was a friend from Portugal, professor from anthropology, that went to your city. And he wrote me from there saying that there was a struggle from activists trying to convince the local authority to pedestrianize the Jamalpur vegetable market.
Oh, that's interesting. Yes, that's from my
Yes.
city. Yes.
Yes, and I did something that I don't like to do. But because it was a bit of it was free work, and I did it in half an hour or so, and I did analyze a little bit how would be the consequences of requalifying the entrance of the Jamalpur vegetable market. Um, and I have a bullet point list. It's like the front of Jabalpur market is used by many sellers. It is
right.
dangerous mix of traffic and pedestrians. It does
That's
have a potential to become a safe and comfortable pedestrian area. There is alternatives for the traffic that currently uses the front of the market. The traffic can be diverted to Jagannath Mandir Road. And this was done with Google, okay? So don't blame me if I did anything wrong.
No, I think that's perfect. It's a great
So
question and suggestion.
yes,
Tell me. Yeah, tell me.
yeah. So my first question is it any progress? Because I never heard of what happened there. Not,
So,
not really.
not really. I haven't visited there since COVID, but I am pretty certain that I this has not happened officially.
Not
And
happened.
the Jamalpur market is this very interesting vegetable market where hundreds of people go shopping because vegetables are cheap and fresh, and that's where all the wholesale vegetables come. And so, from the east part of the city and the west part of the city, people gather there. So it makes
Mhm.
perfect sense to ban vehicles, but it's so controversial, and I also see a lack of political will,
Yes.
and that's not happened. I'm sorry.
It's
I'm sorry
okay.
for myself,
Uh,
but sorry to answer your
no,
question.
no, yes, of course. Yes, that's not surprising because we lack of political will is something that is around the world, unfortunately. And I was a little bit hopeful because it's under the flyover, right? So I was a bit
Yeah.
hopeful when you showed this works that was still in Earth, where you spoke about the mix of pedestrian and traffic. I thought it was like a renewal of the under the flyover, but that was not the case, right?
No.
No. Okay. Okay. Good. Anyway, so that was my 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 personal thing, and I was very curious about that. And yes, and yeah, it's incredible. I would think that I've been in India, but only in the south, and so I'm a little bit aware of the conditions. And of course, it's very, very sad. And I always say that the International Federation of Pedestrians has many, many realities, which is very difficult to generalize. For example, in Canada, the problem is the snow that is pushed from the roads to the sidewalks, which is very unfair and very uncivilized. Even Canada, that we have, mostly a good idea of. And in India, in Kerala, for example, our members are their main concern is wild dogs, which surprises sometimes a lot of people. So that's a problem for pedestrians.
Mm.
And of course, now the heat and the pollution, the air quality,
Mm.
and I think that's something that it's really, really serious stuff. And one of the main things is right now starting to plant trees because trees give
Mm.
shade and
Mm.
and of course, and I think trees at least maybe politically they have some traction because most people
Mm.
like trees. Trees are beautiful, and I would say, yeah, use children, and there is no really a recipe for this, for how to
Mm.
gather political will. It's
Yeah.
something that really we have to fight and be very hopeful. And I think that's very good that you ended your presentation saying at least we can correct a lot of mistakes when we are locked in sometimes in the north,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
where we live mostly urbanism is mostly locked in already, and to change that will take decades. At least you will have some, and sometimes I say that about the United States, Anika, as well, is that
Mm.
when you have a lot of fat in the roads,
Mm.
it's bad, but it's good because you can easily cut out the fat because that's, for a fat person, it's easier to slim down. So And I speak about Portugal as well, because we have a lot of avenues with 4, 5 lanes, 6 lanes. You know, that's quite easy sometimes to take 1 or 2 away. In cities when they have only 2 lanes, is much more controversial to slim down.
Yeah.
But I will think about other things that your presentation gave to me. I will give the word to Hella now.
Sure, sure. So should I take, I don't know if Hella is still on the call. Should I take the question, Anika?
I think that would be great. The first, well, there's 2 questions, and I'm really curious about the question with the good example as well.
Yeah, I'll take the second question first because that's easier to address. We do tax big cars, and I know that the tax for SUVs is higher than the tax for normal cars, but it's not enough to deter people. And there is a huge inequality, right? Like in other countries, in India as well. And so the rich are very rich, and there are aspirations. So it's not, unfortunately, enough to get people to stop buying cars. So we really need to find other, but it raises an important point which I missed in the presentation. I would have liked to say is that one of the reasons is that, and it touches upon all the questions that were asked, we do need to we need incentives and we need infrastructure, sure, but we need to find ways to disincentivize driving, which we're not doing enough. And I can't think of any context, like maybe Stockholm, maybe Singapore, like a handful of examples. But really we don't want to, governments globally, local governments are hesitant to impose those charges on automobiles, and that's the reason why why people don't. So the parking charges here are quite low. It's like 10 Indian rupees at the most, which is a tenth of a euro. It's very nominal even by Indian standard. So if you make parking so cheap, parking freely available, no hardly any tax or disincentive, why would anybody want to move from the comfort of a car to the road? So that's a short answer to your second question, Gela. And Indian cities are not fighting, they're struggling with congestion. There's really, I think we are adding now, Ahmedabad has a new metro line, a brand new one, which opened a month ago. Our first metro lines opened, yeah. And we also have the BRT. So we are adding infrastructure, but the problem is that the growth is so rapid that infrastructure does not keep pace. And what's happening is that the people moving to the new buses and the metro were already public transport users or two-wheeler users or people who had never used motorized transport. So it's really we are feeding into the demand, the growing demand in a good way, but that's not enough to move people from the cars into public transport. So if a person was, for example, taking a three-wheeler, an auto rickshaw, as we call in India, they moved to the bus because they found a nice air-conditioned bus comfortable, but we didn't get the car guy to get on the bus. So Indian cities are not, I wouldn't say fighting. All the big cities in India are congested, and the small and maybe, because India has so many, we are almost like a region, right? We're so big. The very small cities are not yet congested, but they will soon be. So the lock-in is happening pretty fast, I think. In like 2 or 5 years, some cities will be unrepairable, if there is such a word. Like Mumbai is 20 million people. How do you fix a city with 20 million people? It's just hard, right? Nobody can, because the cities become so spread out, so big, that work and home distances increase, and therefore people cannot use non-motorized transport. So we really have to think of how do you empower sort of the sub-regions, the rural areas. So, but that's just from the Indian context. But yeah, keen to hear your views.
So my question is, Minal, that when you mentioned that we are not fighting, but still do you have, pilot projects in any city, which then can be replicated to another city? Because if you don't have example, yes, you can talk about Holland or Portugal or other countries, Germany, because if you don't have pilot or something, as an example, X city, 10 million or 15 million have implemented such things and it worked then it's more difficult, yes? but you have lots of advantages. I mean, you have density, yes, for public transport.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, not many other countries or cities have such density. So it's much easier to prove push and pull technology. I mean approach which works not only in Europe but works in any city. I mean, parking should be paid, must be paid as you know, regulate. I mean, push for like invite pedestrians or transportation which is space efficient. Yes, so buses or and other, I mean, for last mile drive scooters or other, you know, but that's why I'm asked that a very difficult something to implement if it's not local, okay, already, or if there is no local support, I would say, because always we face in our cities that, oh, it will not work here, it work other because they have another culture, they are ready,
I hear that all the time. Yeah.
I mean, but I think people are ready. We all see what's going on, yes, this with congestion or air pollution. So, and when we talk about political will comes from the will of people, yes.
I agree.
So I don't think that people will be against to invest in public transport, cycling, walking, or I mean, I don't think that there is no such place where when you ask a person that they say that I'm against investing on walking, cycling, public buses. You have to just explain very well why you are transforming this road. Yes, we have such problem also in Tbilisi. We are fighting with car drivers because they think that we are taking out space for them. But car drivers also, and any transformation in any street toward like integrated shared mobility or road diet, it's a big fighting. But we are strong because majority of population understands that this is the way in the future. I mean, India has more resources, everything to build new roads, but still your government is limited with these two. I mean, I never been in India, but I know from my colleagues that there's some good islands, I would say, where you have implemented some reforms. China, other some cities. You already have some good examples, yes? And you just need to hire louder, bring these examples to your cities. And also my question is why I'm asking about India, and such problems are facing China or pick other countries, yes, your neighbors, yes, but they're trying. I mean, electrification is good. I mean, car technology, but it's not answer. This is not answer. This is just small, I mean, small step, right direction. But if it comes with that, with this big approach, I mean, what I personally think that push and pull technology approach works everywhere. Which you just slowly try to implement these steps, you know, paid parking, bus priority, yes, more cycling routes, more charging even for big cars. Why not?
No, I agree with you. We do have some good examples. So in some city, there might be a bike lane that was successful. In some other city, there may be electric buses came in fast because of national funding. So there are some scattered pilots, but I can't really think of any city which has made a substantial move away from an automobile centric. So that was I didn't say nothing is happening. Some great stuff is happening, but I think we are past the stage anywhere in the world. And I'm speaking now from an IPCC scientist perspective, that we cannot celebrate pilots anymore. We are like, our house is on fire, and we really need very ambitious. We really need upscaling everything we have, all hands on deck, all tools on the table, all people to contribute and collaborate. So you're right that people, of course, will not object. But then again, environment is not an election issue in India. Like people don't care. So when, like right now in winters, the air pollution is a big issue. So in newspapers, you open it, oh, Delhi is very polluted. Delhi is the capital of the country, you know, and the other cities don't even get a mention. And then when winter will go away, air pollution will no longer be an issue. And there will be the summer heat. And the newspapers will be full of, oh, heat waves, how hot it is, people are suffering. And then it will go away, die down. And then in monsoon, it will be floods. But we are really not having a narrative for a long-term sustained change. So you
Yeah.
have a, yeah, go on, go
Yeah,
on.
just one question that yesterday I read that Krakow city from
Krakow.
Poland, just entire city introduced low emission zones, entire city. That's a
Yeah.
very brave, bold
Yeah.
step, you know. So, I mean, you can, I mean, your cities also or local authorities can do such things. I mean, and under this umbrella, implement steps which benefit to all citizens. Yes. So, I'm sure you have some air pollution programs or something in India, yes, at the government level.
We do. We have air pollution
But
action.
what these programs say exactly, I mean, in terms of transport.
Oh, encourage. Oh, they talk about all the right things. They are great plans. You will be very impressed to read those plans.
But talking, I mean, they don't have action plan or?
They have action plan too, but it's too little too late. So if you introduce a few more buses, it's not going to solve the problem because the growth is much faster than efficiency can catch up with. And you see, India was historically very sustainable. People always used to walk. If you look at India's independence black and white videos, people were always walking.
Yes.
And we suddenly decided, oh, America is great. We should all buy cars. We should all buy SUVs. We should all buy big houses outside the city and drive in the center of the city. And it's ridiculous. And then we will all go back and try and look at the Europe model and say, oh, now we need to retrofit. But it will be 3 decades down, I'm afraid. But maybe I'm just having a very pessimistic day today.
But fossil fuel prices is high in India, yes?
It's high enough, yeah. But the elasticity of mobility is such, people have to travel. So they will pay for the fuel, even if it means compromising or cutting costs elsewhere.
Hi, I'd really like to jump in, Yella, and mention something. Also, we don't have so much time, so I think if the two of you want to really get deep, we should connect on LinkedIn. But I do want to mention something following up on what Gela noted about Krakow. I mean, first, I lived in Poland, Warsaw. The smog here is unbelievable, as it has been for years, I believe, in Krakow. The issues really has been at too little, too late across Polish cities that they're topping the list for air pollution. So it's fantastic that this was introduced. But for example, in my interview with the director of public transit, he's, you know, almost for most of the advocates in the room here, I would say he's even more radical in a way, addressing that there's too many cars in the city. And we say, Gela, you mentioned that the politics is the will of the people. The will of the people is to have their parking and to have oftentimes their free parking, their cheap parking. And I feel like sometimes in walkability circles, there is a naivety that why wouldn't anybody want this? And the reality is, I mean, I come from the USA. The reality is many people will oppose things that threatens their car dominant behavior. And so I really appreciated Minal's note about all hands on deck. And I do want to note, Minal, they're not here right now, but we have multiple people in our network from India, and almost every single one that joins, it feels a little bit like this network that we have, the Global Walkability Correspondence Network, is a bit of a lifeline because, and many of them are research scholars, a few of them, and they come from communities where they feel, yes, the narrative of supporting walkable environment is not happening. Everything, the trajectory is going in another way, and that the governments, local governments are not interested. They're not supporting a sustainable mobility shift. The narrative simply does not exist at a point, at a strength that is needed right now. So I think it's a really difficult question. How do you get there, and how do you
just one question, Enika, we can invite two representatives from the government or Indian government to speak. in one of the meetings, because when I met them, they are also saying that we want to do and we are implementing. So I would say that, yes, so because we need also representatives of the government, yes, maybe we can also invite representatives of the Krakow government. It will be very interesting to hear why they decided to move such a radical way. That's then.
Yeah, we have somebody in the network who actually works for the government in India and works with climate issues. So I'm not at all saying these people don't exist, but the idea that it's super easy to just, kind of initiate the change. I think the reason we're all sitting here and talking about this decade to act is because we're too little too late, basically. And we're looking at this really severe problem that there's the severe problem of what's happening to the environment, and the other severe problem of a complete lack of interest and a complete across the board of many sectors, as well as in public awareness, which is where education comes in, which I think many of us here, we're interested in that advocacy for education piece, which to me is so important, which I want to increase my own activity on. Minal, I wonder if you could say something about that too, about exploring what can be done at the policy level and the personal level. I remember when we spoke, you mentioned, there can be kind of a hopelessness too, especially among younger people who feel they look at the headlines, they look at the reports, and they feel pretty hopeless. So I'm really curious to your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch upon two quick points before I get into answering your question. One was on education, and I think this is linked to policy, but we are not doing enough on education, especially starting young. And so in the school curricula, we don't have any of these. I mean, sustainability, I don't know how it is globally, but in India, it's just like as a theory subject with limited practical knowledge. And I don't think kids are sensitized. So I have, as part of IPCC, done some outreach, but as professionals in this network, I would like to know how many, or do people make that effort to reach out to younger people, because really they can make the change. And some of us are already mentally locked in, I would say. And I'm forgetting my second point, but your question was how to make the personal change. And each time I make an unsustainable choice, I tell myself I'm aware that I made this choice, which I need to change. And we need to be aware. And sometimes it's just like, this is not my problem. I'm not a problem. And we often end up living our lives without wondering we think it's about other people, right? And this could apply to diets, this could apply to air conditioning and to many other sustainability initiatives where you feel that like my choices are more sustainable than other people's choices, and therefore I don't need to change. And in our master's classes, we get people to calculate their carbon footprints in the first class. And that's when it strikes them that, oh, yes, I contribute to air pollution in a very big way and greenhouse gas emissions. At the policy level, just one more thing I wanted to say about Indian cities, and just in defense of the local government in India, that in India, cities are not very empowered. By legislation, they are, but really, we don't have financial devolution, so they don't really have resources. So they depend on the state governments and the national governments. So the electric buses come because of national funding. And then cities have to deal with sanitation and solid waste. And if I do a presentation on solid waste, it would look like this. So we have other competing problems as well. And therefore, transport is not the only problem. And so in terms of sequencing, what happened in Europe is that some of those environmental problems got sorted in the last century, or at least to some extent. But we are at the stage where we are grappling with rapid growth. And so on a Monday morning, the policymaker is not terribly concerned about what's going to happen 2 decades from now, but they are concerned about, for example, an immediate issue about providing housing to some residents. So it's also about that. And at the policy level, I think it needs stronger action, but I would focus on 2 things to keep my answer short. One is providing infrastructure, so investing in infrastructure that does not support motorization. And 2 is incentives. So I think Yella already touched upon that, but incentives and disincentives both. And enforcement, so enforcement of plans. We have the plans. So now climate change is at a stage where we know the solutions. We just have to find ways to implement them. I'll stop, and maybe I see other people have hands up too.
I'll just say very quickly, because I know that we don't have much time. Well, yeah, it's going to be, for better or for good, fascinating next decade. And, I'm almost ashamed to have told you that you should plant trees, which is probably not the best solution that we need. And I'm aware of this. There are young people now occupying universities in Lisbon. And it's amazing because they are asking for something that people like us that are already established in life seems almost impossible, because they want quick and now. And there is this strange and difficult to understand how much is an individual decision, like you say, and how much is a political decision. Yeah, because in fact, politics depends on individuals, like Hella said. So it's a huge challenge we have ahead, and I think is not, yeah, we know it's not with pilots. And I had here the work of ITDP, because you are not in mobility, but you are aware of it. But I will put it anyway in case people want to see it. There is a video about 2018 IDTP. And there is another festival the festival that is called, oh yes, another one question I had for you is that if the climate compensation of COP27 will go for public transport and BRTs, and let's hope so. Yes.
Yeah,
and,
that would be great. If there were resources coming, that change would happen, I guess.
Yes. So there is so many things to say. So thank you very much. And I think because of time, we should just be short. We hope we have more conversations like this.
So Anika, I have like a few minutes, but if there are no questions, then maybe we can stop. But I enjoyed the conversation. I hope I left. I recognize that I don't come from this domain, and I hope there was some takeaways for people from this talk.
I'm going to speak for everybody, I think, but I think definitely we feel there were takeaways. And you said early on, you're not sure you're the right person for this presentation. I absolutely think you were. I value your presentation so much. Speaking globally, but then also sharing the situation from your community. And I'm really hoping you would be able to join us in the future. I would love to develop the series and have panel talks. We have great participants here. If anybody has ideas as well for people to invite to panels, we can have some really interesting discussions, I think. And as I mentioned, we have our India subgroup in our network. It's actually the largest geographical group full of passionate people doing really interesting work, and really, I think, would also enjoy attending another talk by you. Mercy had one question. Mercy, shall I ask your question for you, or do you want to ask it? She had a really, I think, inspiring question about who starts the change we all wish for. Mercy just joined our network. There she is. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. I think it was super useful. It was nice. It was very relatable, and I liked it very much. And then I just wanted to ask, we all wish for this change, but who is starting it? Who begins? Are we that angry enough to start something, or we're just like, oh yeah, but whatever? Who starts the change? Yeah.
So, I mean, theoretically speaking, from my report, all actors have to come together. So it's not just people, but like consumers, people as consumers, but architects, urban planners, building designers, city governments, state governments, national governments, businesses. In India, I see such an apathy from the private sector. It's hardly anything. We just have some funds for corporate social responsibility, which is that a rule that companies have to give for social causes, but the private sector is missing from action. And I see that in some other country context as well, that the companies just don't care, and it's still a profit-driven paradigm. And you're like, you're in this century now, we need that change. But are we angry enough or are we hopeless? And a lot of times people ask me that given that I look at climate scenarios and climate into the future, do I feel depressed? And I just tell myself that there's no time for depression or despair, because if we don't act, then who will? So we have to make a lot of, and I accept all outreach events, even where I feel I may not belong to that group. Now I accept to give talks everywhere, because I think now, in addition to science, everybody needs to be an activist. And I was a scientist 5 years ago. I never did talks. I just spoke to my very small group of professors on very, very narrow scientific data. And now I realize that we all need to reach out, to communicate, to nudge, to shame, to inspire. So I hope some of this conversation rubs off on all of us, including myself.
And one more thing, it's quite practical. So would you confidently say that the people in government can actually make use of public transport? Like, can a minister take public transport from point A to point B? Is it possible?
They can, but will they? Is the question, right?
Good. That's what I was driving at. That's exactly what I was driving.
No one stops them from they can and they should, but do they?
Okay.
No. But then I would point at the minister and say, am I doing it? So it's like really everybody needs to. So occasionally when they open a new metro line, you'll see the minister riding the metro, but then they will have a coach reserved to themselves. And this is not just India. I'm sure it's global, at least in many parts of the world. But yeah, I think I would love to see a city where the minister rides to work every day in public transport.
Yes.
Our ministers ride black Mercedes.
Oh, yeah. And SUVs.
Yeah.
And SUVs.
And with a fleet of security cars with them, and they will close off the roads and not allow normal people to use that road for hours and hours. But yeah, it's the reality.
Apparently, there was a car-free Sunday street in Ahmedabad.
Yeah, that's initiated
that lost
by
the
school.
momentum.
Oh yeah, that is actually an ongoing initiative. It happens quite regularly, and this is initiated by a very inspiring woman. In fact, you should invite her. She's the principal of my daughter's school. She got into education for this reason, to make cities lively. And my daughter goes to that school where she's the principal, and they have these kids from school going and painting streets and painting on the street and dancing, and to have these vibrant spaces where people can come and interact on Sundays.
Okay, that's
the
for the next
article I
panel.
shared. The article I shared said that he lost momentum. I'm glad he didn't. Hopefully, it goes on.
Okay, Minal, I think, are we coming up on time, or we need to close out here?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, I want to say thank you, Mario, for mentioning that. That's fascinating that that's the daughter of the principal of your daughter's school. I already have a vision of the next panel talk that perhaps we can host you at, maybe with some other ideas. I would absolutely love that. And I want to welcome everybody here. I just want to mention we had Mario from in Lisbon, Portugal, Mercy, who just spoke from Accra, Ghana. She's in Belgium and recently graduated, Yella in Georgia, and Mohammed in Iran. Thank you for all the participants. And Dr. Pathak, thank you for your time. I really loved some of the last things you said about how everyone needs to be an activist. I think there is a way for us all to find an activist spirit in us. And also, I love ship analogies. I'm gonna, what you said earlier, all hands on deck. And that's the spirit. I think it would be wonderful to close out on and inspire people listening as well. All hands on deck. It's what we really need right now. So thank you very much for your presentation and your time.
Thank you everyone for your questions, and thank you so much, Annika, for hosting me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.